Careers also shared a statistic, January, right at the start of the year, that 85% of workers were actively looking for a job, another job in late 2023. That's another indicator of disengagement. And we also know that, throughout the pandemic, we all experienced this. Workforce well-being became a grave concern. Middle manager statistics have been the most dramatic and concerning to us. In 2023, 89% of middle managers said they experienced burnout. And that's at the heart of the company. Those are people who are managing people, tasks, and functions. And in the midst of all of that, or maybe as a result, our audiences are really suffering from information inundation and platform proliferation. Human attention spans are on the decline, and it's said that human attention span is less than that of a goldfish now. And 43% of employees are failing to notice important information because of too many applications or just the volume of information. There was another stat from Gallup too, and I know I'm doing a lot of stats here, but I think this is the context that we're operating in and sets the foundation for this discussion. 74% of employees have the feeling that they're missing out on company news. Right. So that impacts what we do and how we communicate. And it's really our role and responsibility, as communications professionals, that's all of us, right, to be active stewards of that audience engagement experience. What are the workforce dynamics that are impacting them, and to really, really streamline. So hopefully that sets the context for the discussion.
I think it absolutely does. And I also think you spoke to something that I feel should come up more in communications-based conversations, which is that there is a lot of data-based evidence for the need and the value of this. We see that a lot with some of those conversations in this space, and we'll talk a little bit more about data in another context later, but that understanding of these feelings of burnout and these feelings of disengagement very directly being a communications-based metric are really impactful. Sarah, someone that's a little bit more, I'll say, boots on the ground, working directly within a company, do you have anything that you'd want to add there?
Absolutely. Yeah, I just want to thank you, Trish, for reminding me of those stats that are so important, but also scary. At the same time, give us more footing and bring us, give us more value within our companies. But like you said, it was our responsibility as communicators to make sure that we're properly engaging with our teammates or colleagues. I also feel like it's our responsibility to meet them where they are. So at Eating Recovery and Pathlight, for instance, about 2/3 of our teammates are deskless. So they are taking care of patients. They're on the floor. Patient care is their highest priority. And these are high risk patients who are struggling with eating and mental health disorders, where we're helping them on their recovery journeys. So is that email that we send to our teammates in the middle of the day the most important thing that they're getting or dealing with that day? Most likely not. And so we have to kind of understand that it's not always top of mind for our teammates to regularly check email or our intranet content. And so we try to get more creative, use some large scale meetings, weekly recap newsletters, and even use physical posters to reach our teammates in our centers. And then we also try to equip our leaders with talking points and resources, since we know that they can more directly reach their teammates better than we can. And just kind of a side note, compared to the other companies I've worked for, I feel like our teammates specifically are above the curve when it comes to mental health awareness and balance because of the industry where we work. We have a lot of therapists who work for us. And so the last thing I want to do as a communicator is, to Trish's point, overload them with information. So we try to be very strategic about the frequency and volume of messages.
That's great. And I think what it also speaks to as well is you sort of really understanding, as you mentioned before, the people that you're directly communicating with, knowing that they have certain baselines of information. And that really comes from a great setup for two-way communication, which is really important. And you've already kind of talked a little bit about this in your answer, but what are some other challenges that you really experience with your team at Eating Recovery Center, and correspondingly pushing out messaging and relevant messaging to your audiences?
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges I've had since I came to this company in late 2022 is we were the first internal communication function this company ever saw. And so we weren't replacing roles or positions. We were coming in brand new in the internal communication space, whereas some people on the marketing team or others supporting our executive team were kind of doing it off the sides of their desk. And so we were a 2-person team, very short staffed, like a lot of communication teams out there. And for me personally, a big challenge was coming from nonprofit earlier in my career. I love to do it all. I love to wear a lot of hats, write, do videos, graphics, engagement work. And so for me, it was a year of prioritizing, setting boundaries around my capacity and scaling back where possible, and just doing a few things really well, just really the quality over quantity. And then we also kind of touched on this, but it was proving our value. So again, we came in brand new, having to prove ourselves. And I hate to say it, but a lot of executive, before they really see the strategy that we bring to the table, some leaders can think of what we do as like the fluffy stuff. And so we try to really position ourselves within our leadership group that we are not the mail carriers. We don't simply deliver messages. We are strategic partners. And so about a year and a half later, I feel like we have gotten a firm footing with our executive team. We've proved that value. And then there's the downside, of course, of proving your value, in that now tons of leaders and teammates are reaching out to us for lots of different things that as a 2-person team just has to be out of scope. But it's kind of the pros and cons of being a good communicator in this space, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. This actually ties in very nicely with a question that we just got, which is, how do you ensure leaders are carrying out information via talking points or resources to deskless employees? So you mentioned you've really developed this culture around this sort of communications being more than a mail carrier.
Yep.
So what are some specific things that you're doing there to support that?
We just try to make it as easy as possible. So talking points, we never want leaders to feel uncomfortable delivering messages. So we just try to set them up by just giving them talking points that are clear, concise. We also give them Q&A. So if there are some conversations that might be difficult to have, and we just had our merit planning after our performance reviews, and so not everyone is getting a merit increase across the company. So there's some tough questions that leaders have to have. And so we're equipping our leaders with the answers to some of those tough questions, so they don't feel like they're put on the spot and they can prepare a little bit. So I would just say making it as easy and digestible as possible.
Frameworks and flexibility.
Yes.
Very nice.
I love that. I knew I loved you, Jeffrey, with now with alliteration, you proved it even more. I think from our perspective, as we're counseling clients, there are kind of 4 areas, and somebody brought up deskless workers in the chat, and we see this as a really, really important audience and a challenge that a lot of our clients are dealing with, particularly in light of this, rampant disengagement, right? So really reaching, supporting, and truly engaging your deskless workers is vital. And it's interesting when you look at the stats around this, and here I go again, yes. Is that 80% of all workers globally are deskless. 80%, right? And as communicators, we just tend to often over-index on white-collar, desk-bound digital communications, right? There are great tools out there, like Staffbase, that do help us to reach those those mobile workforces. As they're out in the field or in their plants or wherever they happen to be working. But the other thing that I think is really interesting and important for us to recognize too is that turnover is really high with deskless workforces. 61% of deskless workers have considered quitting their jobs over the past year. So, and maybe that's even higher with that 85% of LinkedIn stat. But deskless workers are really, really vital. Directly supporting people managers. So Sarah was talking about activating and equipping senior leaders. We're seeing a lot of need at that middle manager and people manager level, because we know that cascades are broken. You think about like that telephone game we used to play when we were kids, and you whisper around the circle, what happens when you get halfway around? It's broken, Right?
Completely
Or
different.
I don't even know what they said anymore, right? That's what's happening in companies. So yes, we have to activate our senior leaders, but for the larger companies, and a lot of these we serve, workforces of 25,000, 100,000, 180,000, we have to go directly to the people manager. So they're being asked to be good at to be good at their function, at managing people, at communications, and also to a point being wellness ambassadors. So we're doing a lot of work there, prioritizing communications. We've talked about this. Like, we have to prioritize those communications for our audiences, right? We can't expect them to say, here it is, you pick, right? So we have to really be relentless about what do they need to know first, second, and third, and how do we get that right in front of them to equip them. If we know they're missing 74% of company news, we've got to get that front and center for them. What do they really need to know, share, and do? And fourth is the Hispanic workforce. This is specific to U.S., but 43% of the U.S. workforce speaks another language at home, and
Right.
78% of net new workers and are going to be Hispanic between now and 2030. So all of those are kind of very important things for all of us to be considering.
Definitely. That's really great, worth considering too, especially to Sarah's earlier point about meeting people where they are. Language, accessibility related to language. A very common one that I often bring up in supporting enablement-based conversations is ensuring things like closed captioning for videos for people who have hearing issues, things like that. I think that those are really important points. We did get a question from the chat, Trish, that I did want to throw to you. What's your working definition of a deskless worker? How do you actually define that?
Well, people who are not sitting in front of a computer or even a device most of the day. So we're doing a lot of work with currently with plant workers who they can't even have a device on the line. And so we're working with them to listen and understand what they need. We're working with their supervisors to help them with recognition and validation for what good looks like. We're also working with what devices we have, not devices, but channels we have available, whether it's, break room signage, or is there a wall that we can use? Is there a digital sign? Are there banners? But a lot of that work is really with the people managers and equipping them with what they need to engage and inform their workforce.
Got it. Yeah, something that we have a conversation about a lot at Staffbase is the definition of a deskless worker can be a little different depending on how your organization is set up or structured. It could be something as simple, and I actually see this in the chat. Certain deskless employees, they don't have company emails. They're working on company projects. They're a part of the company, but due to the nature of their job, they don't have that email access. And an immediate ramification of that is email might not be the best channel for reaching those people. So again, how do we reach them? Sarah, I don't know from your experience, I know we have talked about this a little bit
Yes.
in non-webinar calls, if that's something that you deal with.
It is, yeah. Like I said, 2/3 of our employees are taking care of patients. And I don't feel like our strategy is perfect at this point because, like I said, we just started in early 2023, just building modern infrastructure. But something that we've been working with Staffbase on potentially to launch possibly next year is the digital signing that Trish mentioned. And that's a TV screen where you can feed in your homepage intranet news from a corresponding laptop. And so that's something that we're looking at for our organization. We also, like Trish mentioned, we also rely on 8.5 by 11 posters that we have our practice managers or executive directors print out for our engagement. Our annual engagement survey, for instance, is coming up in a couple of months. And we know that we're not going to get everyone via email or our intranet. And so we're putting up, pieces of paper on the wall with a QR code so that they can scan it and take our engagement survey. An additional thing that we use is Staffbase's mobile app. Our teammates don't have company issued devices. They share laptops within their centers for the most part and use their own personal cell phones. So it's not a perfect solution, but they do have access to the Staffbase mobile app. So that's a way that they're able to consume our content as well.
Of course, it's very much a multi-channel solution, and what is going to work very specifically for one organization or even one industry. I saw some people in the chat talking about being in the healthcare communication space and how there's very specific solutions that work in that environment. might not necessarily play in other spaces. And that's okay. You know, we need to find the right solution to get the right messaging to the right people at the right time. And with that in mind, I also wanted to ask Sarah.
Uh-oh. Did Jeffrey freeze or did, okay. Oh,
I think
no.
Jeffrey froze.
The communities that you have.
Oh, there he goes. Could you ask that again, Jeffrey?
Sorry
You
about that.
froze for a couple seconds.
Are we back?
Yes.
Of course. I was asking what specific techniques do you find most effective for crafting the messages to resonate with your employees, both the desked and the non-desked, those sort of different communities that we've been discussing?
Yeah, something that I've done at this company that I have not done at any other company that has been really beneficial for me and my team is creating more or establishing more formal channels of feedback. You know, we always have a feedback link at the bottom of our newsletter or a feedback survey out after our all company meeting, things like that. But we actually have a culture advisory board. And this kind of came, I more or less inherited part of this group. They were they called themselves like party planners. They were the National Culture Committee. And I wanted to bring them along as being a two-person team, brand new to the organization. I knew that I couldn't just make decisions in a vacuum. I was launching our company intranet and our company engagement and recognition platform all within 2 months of each other in the same year. And I knew as the new kid on the block, it would not go over very well if I just made decisions and moved forward without getting feedback from teammates who had been here for a long time. Especially because I am a teammate who's working in front of my desk. I live outside of Nashville. We don't even have a center in Tennessee. And so I'm not plugged into the day-to-day workings of our teammates. And so I'm a little bit out of touch with what they're doing on a regular basis. And so I have monthly meetings with our culture advisory board. We bring some high-level communication strategies, initiatives, engagement initiatives to the table and give them an opportunity to say like, yeah, that's awesome, or ooh, it's not going to go over very well here, and here's why. And I use that feedback very seriously to guide my strategies going forward. And that's been, I think, the most beneficial, valuable mechanism I've found so far here.
That's really great. That actually leads me to segue to one of the questions that we got in the chat, which is on how do you view the visibility of executive leadership as a component for increasing that employee engagement? Because you've talked about a channel you've created that allows you to get that sort of boots on the ground feedback. You know, there's also that element too of some of that culture around communication needing to be transparent from the top down.
Yeah, so we use our executive team very strategically, or we try to, in our messaging. So for instance, we've got, what is it? Registered Nutritionist Dietitian Day coming up in a few days. And so it doesn't make sense for me to write a message and for that observance, to recognize that observance and send it out to all teammates. And so I'll tap into one of our executives, our chief medical officer who has experience in that realm, to send out a message. So we actually track data based on our inbox where we send leader messages from. And we know that the messenger can make a really big impact in how our teammates are consuming or even opening the email, even if they're interested in it at all.
Very nice. Trish, any specific techniques from your side?
Yeah, I think, well, we talked about this, like that streamlining and how important it is to really be relentless about that. So I think we just got to put ourselves in the shoes of our audiences. And I did a LinkedIn post last week about this, but we really look at your content and slash it in half. If you can cut 50% of the content out, that's going to help a lot. Maybe it sounds counterintuitive for a communications firm to say do less, but that's what we need to be doing. I think listening too is really, really important. You know, Sarah talked about understanding your audiences. I mentioned that too. So as much as you can be audience specific and not just have a shotgun blast out approach, there's some things that are relevant and important to your entire employee audience, but there are things also that might be specific to different functions or levels within the company. So as much as you can be thoughtful about that and target those communications, I think that's really important. It's come up in the chat, and we were just talking too about like using those influencers. They may be at the top of the organization, but they may also be in the middle of the organization. They could be throughout the organization. So know who your influencers are. And then, of course, using data. There are two frameworks that we also use, for internal communications, planning, and counsel with our clients. One is always be really mindful about what you want your audience to know, share, and do from each communication. And so if you go through that thought process, or it could be a way you're working with business partners, have a conversation about, well, what do you want our audience to know, share, and do from this? Could be really helpful. And then I think someone's going to be posting our 4Ps blog, which I developed when I was working for a major health system through COVID and running external communications. A lot of that too was internal audience communications. But, you can use this framework of 4Ps, like what do you pitch and promote? What do you package with other things? What do you park until later? And what do you punt? So that article might help you too as a framework for really, streamlining and resonating.
Absolutely. We've also gotten some great little recommendations as well, and memorable comments. I want to spotlight that somebody commented half as long for twice as good. As in response to the streamlining comment. I think that that's really impactful. We also got a know, do, feel, which is very similar to what we were talking about, getting that sort of value out of it. And someone actually mentioned AI, which is funny because when we were preparing for this, I was actually mentioning to Trish and Sarah that something I've started to take on recently is using AI to make some of my explanations a little bit more succinct, make some of them a little bit more clear, maybe even adjust the tone a little bit. So I think that those are some really effective individual techniques in addition to the larger strategic techniques that we've been talking about for that message crafting. And ultimately, the message crafting is why we're here. We're trying to get the information out. So it's really nice that there's some concrete immediate steps that people can take and maybe larger term things, longer term goals that people can take. Also, the 4Ps are linked now in the chat function. Someone just asked that, so I want to be clear that those are up there. They were shared from the Staffbase side. Now, with that sort of conversation that we just had about the messaging, making that most impactful, there's also that element of if you don't place the message in the right moment, it might not necessarily land. So how do we identify some of those moments for changing the communication approach, not just even for a specific message, but for the organization as an entirety?
Yeah, I'll start that one. Listen, we all know this. I mean, we feel it viscerally, I'm sure, every day is audience engagement. It's a moving target, right? And, what was the best practice, last year or even last week or sometimes even yesterday may not be a best practice today. So we really have to, keep our finger on the pulse of what's going to resonate in the moment. I think too, we've got to be mindful of the fact that, the pressures and issues that we're navigating as communicators are really the same pressures and issues generally that our audiences are faced with. So we've got to be mindful of all of that. It's our plan is a living, breathing document. What was it that you said, the 2Fs? You said be flexible and something else, Jeffrey, earlier.
Oh, have frameworks and be flexible.
Have frameworks and be flexible, right? I think too, if you haven't done this yet, a tip that something that I did when I was at this healthcare system, right when COVID was starting to raise its ugly head here in Georgia, is I formed a communications council, and I pulled in government relations and our health equity, Center of Health Equity, and community relations and marketing and internal communications, and there were others that I invited. At the time, we were doing it weekly. And this communications council really was so vital for navigating change, anticipating change, sharing, challenges, but also what are the opportunities. And we really went round robin. It was a 30-minute round robin thing so that they were aware of what we were driving. We were aware of what they were driving. And we found all these connection points. It was really about connecting the dots. And I think for navigating change, that can be super, super helpful. So if you don't have a communications council where you're doing that on a regular basis, doesn't have to be weekly, but I think that could really help. Maybe if you're going through a crisis, you want to make it more frequent. Yeah, I think that could be really helpful too. And then, the other thing too is just quarterly meetings with your business partners, or maybe monthly, or maybe more frequently, because recognize that business partners across your organization are communicating with the same audiences and fueling that inundation. So as much as you can work on, speaking with one unified voice to your audiences and drive consistency and collaboration, you're going to be helping yourselves, but also your audiences.
Definitely. I think what you also were speaking to when you were talking about sort of those communication channels and that opportunity to sort of converse is empowering yourself to be agile, because there's also the element if you're meeting regularly, when something like COVID comes up, or maybe hopefully something comes up that's major, but not, going to meaningfully spin the world on its axis in the way that COVID did, you're able to actually make the necessary adjustments you need to for your plan, because you can make as many plans as you want, but reality is going to ensue, something's going to happen. And if you don't have that structure in place to make those adaptations, to make those decisions, it's going to be really hard to get your message across. Your end recipient's going to be like, well, this is no longer relevant, or, well, this other thing is happening. Why are we not talking about it? And unless you have that in place, you can't really do that. And you'll see that if you're having those recurring sort of quarterly or monthly meetings as well, like this isn't as impactful. People are asking us about this, and it gives you that power, which is great.
Yeah, frameworks with flexibility.
Absolutely.
Future
I'm
term.
stealing that for sure. Yes.
I know, yeah.
Maybe I should be trademarking things. Sarah, anything to add on your side for that?
Yeah, I echo everything that Trish said. It's all about, actually, one of our core values is flexibility. So it gives us a little bit more of, if we need to be agile and pivot our strategy a little bit, we can be like, hey, you said that we can do this because it's one of our core values. And we also expect the same back from our teammates. I mean, not everything that we promise, in quarter one may come to fruition in quarter four. And we need just our teammates' feedback so that they are not holding us to the fire and saying, you promised this 3 quarters ago. Well, everything has changed since then. And so we really expect the same type of flexibility back from them. And I will say that we aren't quick to throw in the towel with strategies. We do need to be flexible and to pivot when necessary. But just because, I spoke to earlier, we may have the best email, and it's got a corresponding feature story and it's got videos and all this pizzazz and stuff. And we might be really excited to send it out and to launch a campaign. Well, something that we might not have even known was going to happen, like a patient-centered activity happens in one of our centers,
right,
and nobody looks at our email that day, or nobody from that center looks at our email that day because it's just simply not the most important thing going on in their world. And so we just try to be okay with that, but then also use as many channels as possible. So we've got 2 weekly newsletters. One is specific to leaders that we send out Fridays, and it kind of helps them prioritize their week. So we call it Friday Flares, where we love the alliterations here as well. Yep. And it's sending a flare out to leaders like, hey, this is what's coming up next week. We put a communication schedule. So we have an action item area. Here are the things that you and your teammates need to be doing and acting on. Here are the due dates. And then we also have a communication schedule. So it's Monday through Friday. Here are all the communications that you can anticipate us sending to you and which day. And it gives them a little bit more insight so that they're not blindsided by anything. So we do that as well, just reinforcement. And then Mondays, we do kind of a recap newsletter for all of our teammates across the company. So we're just trying to use channels as much as different channels as much as we can, so that we're reinforcing in different ways in case we missed anyone during the initial launch.
Yeah, definitely. And something that we've talked about is the understanding of what channel is the most impactful for what message, and also based on what needs are. So we do work with App Intranet, for example, for certain kinds of information that's really, really important and kind of needs to very directly meet people where they are. Because if it's on the app, they can quite literally like have it pushed to them via push notification. Yeah. That's a capability that we have with Staffbase. Whereas the emails can be something a little bit different. They could be time sensitive, but maybe not, let's call it time critical, as you were kind of talking about, and give us the opportunity to take a step back from that very like reactionary communication for something that's a little bit more strategic. So we have all these different levers that we can pull when we're dealing with internal communications, which is really impactful.
I'm totally using Friday flares. I love that, Sarah.
I think that went
Thank
over
you.
well. There was also somebody who spotlighted something called Leaders Notes, which goes out on Monday morning. I like that too. Kind of,
Yeah.
I think that's a very a bit more strategic at a high level for when you're kind of kicking off your week. I think that's a nice look.
Yeah.
But with all those sorts of messages and all those different ways that we could share them as well, I wanted to segue to the next question, which is on KPIs and metric performance. We got a couple chat specific questions on this too. So I think that this is very top of mind. Something that I often say to my clients is that the KPIs are really only impactful if you have a baseline of where you're starting. So without that, you don't really know what success could be or what success could look like. And even within your organization, there's different departments or environments or regions that might have different baselines. We talked a little bit about deskless workers, but there could even be cross-cultural considerations if you're dealing with a global company. The way that people engage might change by region or market. We've talked a little bit about some of the complexities dealing with communications in the healthcare space, but there's other verticals where there's other things at play that might impact what success looks like. So what are some ways that you utilize data-driven insights to enhance your internal communication strategies?
So I'll kick that off. And I think I was at a conference last week and I asked, it was actually our client there was kind of a bit of a coincidence, and she's chief communications officer for a large global pharmaceutical company. And, I asked the question, because internal communications, I think sometimes is a lot harder to measure than in external communications. I feel like over the past couple of years, I've seen this come up over and over and over again. And the reason is because we don't just want to be thinking about the clicks, we want to be thinking about the outcomes and
Yes.
the impacts that we're creating. And I don't think anybody's truly unlocked this yet. And we were talking with somebody on my team earlier this week about this, is that it really depends. It depends on what you're trying to accomplish. So when you're setting out your goal for a campaign or for specific communication, what is it that you want to accomplish with this? Sometimes it might be, performance increase. Sometimes it might be deeper engagement in work, productivity, wellness. I mean, they're harder to measure, but you have to get specific, I think, about what you want to accomplish. Data is really, really important, but that can be a lot harder to measure because we don't want to be focused on output, like Sarah was saying. Like we're strategic advisors. We want to be focused on the outcomes, the behaviors that we're helping to create, and the impacts. The other thing that I want to mention on this too, though, Jeffrey, is that just because a campaign doesn't do well and get the metrics that you're looking for doesn't mean that the message of the campaign is wrong. It might be the wrong time, it might be the wrong platform, it might be the wrong the wrong whatever. It could be just delivered in a way that was not resonant in that moment. And Gartner said last year that the most strategic and creative communications are those that we resurface and repurpose. So think about it like a diamond with multiple facets. What that core message is that you need to get out to your audience. Maybe you take a different facet, a different approach in order to ensure that you're getting it at the right time, the right moment, the right platform, all of that.
Yeah, there's a lot of components and there's a lot of data points, which is really great. So sometimes it does feel like it could be very easy to just pull a bunch of metrics and therefore do whatever. But you're speaking to something that I used to run up against a lot when I did some data analytics work, which was essentially, if you can't ask yourself why 3 times when you're looking at a data point and answer it each time, kind of going a little bit deeper, hitting it with a different angle, it's not a good metric. It's not a metric that's helpful for you right now. So even if it is something that wasn't as successful as you want it to be, you can do those 3 whys, like, why didn't this go? We expected it to kind of get this % change. It didn't. Well, why? The message wasn't in the right channel, so less people opened it. Well, why? Because the last time we did this, it was successful. Well, why? Oh, it was temporally bound because it was around things related to benefits, and therefore it was coming at the end of the year when people were looking into that to just make sure they'd handled it.
Or there was something happening in the world around them at that time that diverted their attention. That happens a lot, right?
Yeah.
So,
and we need to ask those questions. So it's great that we have all these data points, but we have to put them into that larger context.
Right.
Sarah, actually, do you have some specific examples on that using some of the analytics from Staffbase? I know we get a lot from the intranet, and how you kind of navigate those and help those guide your strategy.
Yeah, I think it's so important, like both of you said, to set realistic KPIs that are specific to your teams. And like I mentioned before, When my team came in almost a year and a half ago, we didn't have modern communication channels. There was no email platform. We used SharePoint, and so there's no news mechanism, at least at that point. We weren't using it on SharePoint. And so this was a whole new world for our teammates and our leaders. And so, like you said, Jeffrey, we had no benchmarks, which I think were more exciting to me than anything else. You know, I could always compare to past companies, but really it's never apples to apples. And so I really tried to get the email open rates, for instance, or you know, page views from my past company out of my brain when I thought of
Right.
what we're dealing with now, because it's a completely different workforce. But with that said, you know, we launched all of these new tools, and we wanted to be pretty conservative as to what metrics we tracked and reported out to leaders. And so I'm just going to do a little bit of bragging, not for myself, but for Staffbase, because without their platform and tools, we would not be able to even track any of this data. And I think I'm pretty proud of these numbers. So we've got about 2,500 teammates, and about 94% of our teammates are active each month in our intranet, with just under 30,000 total page views on average month over month. So again, I'm going to be, you know, we launched in July of last year. And so I'm using this year of data to kind of create my benchmarks and my averages, and then we can start comparing the next year. But I feel very encouraged by those numbers, especially given the fact that most of our workforce doesn't have access to their own device. And then in a similar vein, we didn't have email metrics either. And so I was really interested to see, and I made a lot of assumptions. I assume because our teammates didn't have, you know, they weren't sitting on their phones all day, they're taking care of patients. I was like, man, we're going to get really, like, I was expecting a 30% open rate across all of our inboxes. And we actually have seen a 67% open rate. And that's the main metric that we are tracking and reporting out for our email function. And I have kind of looked into the data. We can do the breakdown now, and I can see by role. And I was pretty shocked to see how many of our patient-facing teammates are looking at our email despite not having the easiest access to it. So those are some of the stats that we track there. But again, I'm just going to be using that. I'm in a great position to use those as my benchmarks as an average, and then see where we are a year from now.
And I think that speaks to a great point about that is an opportunity when you're analyzing data like this, which is you don't want to go into it assuming what you know will actually be rendered true, because it's very easy to just be like, well, I know people who are deskless are on their feet a lot, so they're not going to read emails. But what ends up happening is the messaging is relevant to them because they can access a device, even if it's not their own. They're able to take a look. So with that in mind, what can we now think about when it comes to our content strategy to make sure that that remains impactful? Especially because, and I know because we've talked about this specifically, we're starting to move past the point where this is still the new and exciting thing. Now it's kind of just a part of the day-to-day life. Behaviors might adjust. Let's think about that and make sure that we're being proactive on that point. I wanted to actually take a few minutes as well. There's a couple specific questions in the Q&A that are, I think, pretty cool and a very, very tactical and specific for both of you, Sarah and Trish. So would it be all right if I pop some of those through and we kind of popcorn through solutions or suggestions for some of these?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. One of them is specifically for Sarah, and it's going to be, do you have anything you can share about setting up your communications council? I've been considering that for my organization.
Yes. So, well, I know, Trish, you spoke about the communication council, which sounds a little bit different than my culture advisory board, but I can speak to mine first and then pop it over to you. Like I said, I inherited about 10 teammates who were part of a national culture committee, and luckily most of them wanted to stay on board as I kind of brought them through to the new world of modern communication. And then this is very timely because in January, I just did a campaign to get more regional representation, or better regional representation across all of our teammates. And so we did an application process and made it, to Trisha's point of making things very succinct. We knew that people were not going to fill out, a 5 or 10 question application. It was simply, I believe, your name, of course, your which of our core values resonates with you the most. There was a question related to DEIB, so how you feel diversity strengthens our company, and then what you feel you could bring to the culture advisory board. And then I stripped all of the personal data from I think we got about 25 applications, stripped all of the personal information from that and had our current members vote, and then kicked it back to our teammate experience to make the final decisions. But we made sure that we were having a kind of an even ratio of about 1 culture advisory board member to every about 100 teammates in each region.
Nice.
And so we do monthly meetings with them.
Amazing.
Yeah. And for us on the Communications Council, so I stood this up when we were headed into COVID. It was, we actually had the first hospitalization and the first death in Georgia from COVID at our system. And very quickly became clear that we needed to have some, aside from all of the many conversations that were happening, we need to have some cohesion around our messaging and what were we hearing, what were we putting out there, how are we engaging all of our audiences, both internal and external. So the Communications Council that I created at the time was running on a weekly basis, included, like I said, government relations, our Center for Health Equity, the community relations team, marketing. There were other people that were involved too, and it was like 1 representative from each team. And the way that we ran it was kind of a round robin, but it wasn't like just a report out. It was like, let's engage and find where those connective tissues are. If one hospital, it was all the hospital marketing directors too. So if one hospital marketing director, there was something happening in their hospital, another one would say, oh, that's happening here. And then a government relations person would say, oh, we're about to do this, presentation at such and such event. And all of a sudden they had the information that they needed. So the value in that was really, the connective tissue. And that was for both external and internal. It was very holistic for all of our audiences, but it was the first time that we brought everybody together to have those conversations, and we did it every single week during COVID for about 2 years. So,
how did you keep those meetings, effective and productive? One of the questions that we got was the meetings on this specific issue can be unproductive because people are multitasking. It doesn't necessarily feel people are taking it seriously. I think some of this is a little bit of a cultural component, but are there specific strategies that helps those meetings be sort of like lean, mean, and really impactful?
Framework and flexibility. I mean, really, I had a structure for them that was, and I wanted to keep them succinct because everybody had so many meetings going on, and there were just a lot happening, obviously, as there continues to be today. So there was a framework, and I changed the rotation every week. So I wouldn't necessarily kick it off. I'd say, all right, Christy, you're kicking this off, or, Brandon, you're kicking this off today. And then I'd change the rotation so they wouldn't like tune out for the first part. And everybody needed to be ready to be called on. But it was 2 minutes. Everybody had 2 minutes, and that fit within our 30-minute time frame. It allowed for a tiny bit of cushion for conversation. But the call to action was, we need to have a separate call about that. Christy, can you set that up? So.
Amazing.
Hi, everybody. I just wanted to pop in real quick. We have about 10 minutes left. So if anybody has any questions lingering out there, make sure to put them in the Q&A. And any questions we don't get to today will be passed on to Staffbase for a follow-up after today's webinar.
Thanks, John. Yeah, we've got a couple more that I would definitely like to talk through. Trish, if you're up for it. I know it's been a lot of talking.
Yeah, go for it.
One that's very interesting to me, as someone who has some external communication experience, how much do you engage with your external communication team to develop your messaging?
So we work with marketing quite a bit to align, so we're trying to align observances, recognition months, things like that. But we're also trying to, as a 2-person team, seeing where we can kind of do, shared services model, where if you're creating content around Women's History Month, for instance, and we want to do something internally for that, instead of me rewriting a message that maybe marketing is doing, we tap into them and partner closely to make sure that we're on the same page, sharing messaging, and can kind of share the workload a little bit. We also work with marketing for our all company meetings. We do quite a production video. It's a mix of pre-recorded and live. And so we tap into our marketing team to make sure that the branding is good. We use marketing's videographer. And then we also try to communicate some of the campaigns they're doing. For instance, they just launched a campaign for increasing patient access. And it's this wonderful campaign, full Marcom campaign, social media, the whole bit. And we wanted to make sure that teammates knew all the great things that marketing was doing and collaborating with other teams across the business. So we will write feature stories and put them in our newsletter on Intranet.
That's great. Yeah, and I think one thing that's not always considered is, even though external communications is supposed to be external facing and marketing is kind of supposed to look outwards, employees still see it. So if it feels like there's a big disconnect there, that will impact sort of the internal culture and the trust that people have in leadership, which, you know, definitely has a big ramification.
You're so right. And my team is probably sick of hearing me say this, but you know, internal communications don't always have external implications, but external communications always have internal implications. So that holistic approach, I mean, some people call it mixternal, but it's really a holistic approach. That unified one voice is really critical to all of your audiences, both internal and external. So embrace that wholly.
Absolutely. There's one question here that I want to also flag, because I think it actually goes back to some of the database conversations we had. How do you get buy-in on a strategy that you really believe will work, but you're receiving pushback? How do you deal with leaders who are not super receptive to change? This, I think, speaks to something a little bit in our KPI conversation that I'm not sure we touched on too much, which is that communications data justifying some of the work we do as communicators.
Hopefully you guys are taking notes with some of the stats that I was sharing, because that can help. And then when you've got a rationale that's not, you know, obviously what's happening within your company, but what you can anticipate and what you know is happening, you know, contextually, that could really help. So going in with, you know, a business case and understanding it, I think our client mentioned this too, or somebody mentioned this at the conference I was at last week. Really get smart about business acumen and how to build a strong rationale for what you need to do and why you need to do it and what the impact will have. That's going to equip you to have those conversations and to move those conversations in the right direction.
I'll just add to, I know I've been talking about the culture advisory board ad nauseum, but I feel like that's been another way. You know, it's not just me making the decisions. I've been talking to 10 to 20 other teammates across the organization, and they feel this is the direction. And I feel leaders find that hard to argue with, because leaders are just as out of touch or more out of touch than I might be sitting in my home office. But teammates are really the ones that can tell us, is this going to make a positive impact, or is this the wrong move?
Definitely. And I think overall, when you have structures like that in place, it leads to that culture of transparency, which is really essential for some of those shifts that, you know, sometimes maybe leaders are not aware that they need to make, or not sure if they need to make. But if you, as the internal communicator, have created that channel for the conversation to flow, it can really make a difference, and it can really move the needle. With that in mind, there's actually a couple questions on channel strategy that I'd love to throw in. I think we're kind of close to time, so we can do that and then kind of conclude with our final takeaways. So a question was asked on channel governance, and also a question was on showing the importance and encouraging people to use channels that are available, like email and intranet. This specific person is saying that they use their intranet as a central hub for the workforce. But how do you govern all those channels, and how do you ensure that people are actually using them and excited to use them?
We try to drive as much traffic back to our intranet as possible. I mentioned this super briefly, but we have an external engagement and recognition platform as well. And so we're constantly cross-promoting those. The newsletters have also really taken our page views and our employee interaction to another level. Before we had the newsletters and launched those, where we're kind of reinforcing the feature stories. We do so our intranet is called the Beacon. And so we do like a beacon spotlight. And so we will spotlight a page that maybe in the navigation, since launch, but people don't really pay attention to it or didn't know it existed. And so we're just constantly trying to find new and different ways to drive people back to our intranet. And then using QR codes on paper posters has helped as well.
Well, we'll have to make sure that they're deriving value when they get there. And again, going back to prioritizing. So I often, when I'm doing trends presentations for like every year we do, here's what the top trends were in predictions. I have this slide from like an image from the Raiders of the Lost Ark where they're like rolling the thing into this massive warehouse. I think a lot of people feel like that when they go into intranet. So they're like, forget it, I'm backing out. I'm not going to find what I need. Right. So we have to, again, our role and responsibility as communications professionals is to make it easy for people to find what they need when they need it, and for them to consume it and adopt those, those actions or behaviors. So we've got a modern, this whole notion of a modern intranet, right? And prioritizing communications and making it of value to them. Don't just park it there and think, oh, it's there, we'll build it, they'll come. It's got to be refreshed. You've got to keep keep that fresh, not only drive people to it, but drive value from it.
Amazing. So since we are close to time, I do want to say that we're going to collect some of the questions that are unanswered and actually send through some of the answers related to that and some resources related to that as a follow-up from today. Also, feel free to reach out to the three of us on LinkedIn if you have any questions. We're happy to continue these conversations, of course. This is really essential to what we do and the value that we provide. I wanted to just end with an opportunity to ask both of you, what's the main thing you hope today's audience will remember and put into practice to amp up their internal communication strategy?
Sarah?
Yeah, I can go first and you can bring it home, Trish. My three things, I guess I would like to just voice as takeaways are: you can be part of a lean team and still make an impact. It may be a little harder to pare down your strategies and all your initiatives, but you can still make an impact with such a small team. And then, no surprise, listen to your teammates, get ownership and get feedback and input from them to help guide your strategies. And then the last is, don't be a mail carrier, be a strategic partner. You are the expert, you were hired to do the job, be confident in that, and also have the humility to change course if needed.
I love that. I think we talked a lot about understanding your audience and their workforce dynamics. Hopefully some of the stats that we've shared here, there are many more, like things that we need to be aware of, like what the impact is of training and recognition can have a dramatic positive impact on engagement and on performance. Listening to your audiences, tapping the data, working really to achieve resonance, streamline outcomes over output. But I think to bring it home, as Sarah said, we've talked a lot about this. Engagement is not transactional. It's behavioral. So we have to get really smart about the psychology of human communication and listen. And if we're always bringing tactics to the table, like something comes up and we dive in with the tactic, we're going to be engaged tactically. If we're asking smart questions, bringing the data and the rationale and the smart business acumen to the table and that strategic thinking, then we're going to be engaged strategically. And that's where we want to be. Engagement's not transactional, it's behavioral.
Thank you both for that. I think the last thing that I'll add is working in communications. I think that this is an area where you need to be in a space of perpetual education. And rather than sort of feeling like that's a chore and like, you're in school again and have to read books and take tests, I think it's more about just being very, very open and curious, because there's always something new that you can incorporate. There's always something new that you can need to adjust to. And that is really not only what makes us valued and valuable, but also makes the work we do really impactful.
Well said.
Well, everyone, that brings our time together today to a close. I want to thank Trish, Sarah, and Jeffrey for a wonderful discussion today. As a reminder to our audience, you'll receive a survey within 24 to 48 hours. Once you respond, you'll gain access to the recording from today's session, so be sure to take that survey. On behalf of Ragan Communications and Staffbase, thank you for attending today, and have a great rest of your day.